Have you ever witnessed how a single moment of courage can completely rewrite the destiny of two broken souls? On a freezing winter evening in Boston, a man who had sworn never to feel anything again saw something that made his blood run cold. A pregnant homeless woman being violently shoved to the ground by a group of teenagers, clutching her swollen belly as they laughed and walked away, leaving her there in the snow, trembling with pain and fear. What happened next didn't just save two lives that night, but transformed forever the heart of a billionaire who had vowed never to believe in anything again. Stay until the end, because this story will prove to you that sometimes God writes second chances in the most unexpected places, and that redemption can find us even when we've stopped searching for it. The winter wind cut through the streets of downtown Boston like invisible knives when William stopped his black Mercedes at a red light on Boylston Street. At 36 years old, this man in his impeccable charcoal suit had learned to move through the city without really seeing anyone, without getting involved in anything that wasn't his business. But that evening, something forced him to turn his head toward the alley beside the old brick building. A scene he would never forget unfolded before his eyes. A group of 4 teenagers, probably no older than 17, surrounded a young woman who was clearly pregnant, her belly enormous beneath a worn gray coat that had seen better days. They were shouting something about homeless people ruining the neighborhood, about how she should go beg somewhere else. William watched as one of them, a tall kid with a red hoodie, shoved her hard. The woman stumbled backward, her hands instinctively protecting her belly as she fell onto the icy sidewalk with a cry of pain that pierced the night air. The teenagers laughed, high-fiving each other as they walked away down the alley, their voices echoing off the brick walls. The woman lay there on the frozen ground, curled into herself, her entire body shaking with sobs and cold and fear. William felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years, a burning rage that started in his chest and spread through his entire body like wildfire. He didn't think. He simply turned off the engine, threw open his door and ran toward the alley, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the ice. Behind him, car horns began honking as other vehicles waited for him to move, but he didn't hear them. Every step that brought him closer to that scene took him nearer to something he didn't yet understand, a force that went far beyond simple outrage. When he reached the sidewalk, the young woman was trying to get up, using a lamppost for support while pain contorted her face. Her features were delicate and young, probably no more than 24 years old, with auburn hair that escaped from beneath a knitted cap full of holes. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, shimmered with tears she was trying to contain. William noticed immediately that her coat, though clean, was threadbare at the elbows, and her boots, once black, were held together with duct tape. The woman looked at him with a mixture of shame and fear, as if expecting him to also tell her to leave, to disappear, to stop being an inconvenience to people who had real lives. William clenched his fists, feeling fury toward those teenagers who had already vanished into the Boston night. He slowly approached her, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Are you all right?" William's voice came out rougher than he intended. The woman nodded quickly, too quickly, still leaning against the lamppost. She tried to straighten up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, a hand that William noticed was red and chapped from the cold. "I'm fine, sir," she whispered in a trembling voice. "Really, don't worry, they're just kids. Sometimes kids do stupid things without thinking. I'm sure they didn't mean any harm." William stood frozen at those words. This woman, thrown to the ground without mercy, curled up in pain on an icy sidewalk, still found a way to defend those who had humiliated her. He observed her eyes, full of a kindness that seemed impossible under these circumstances, and something inside his chest stirred. It was a strange sensation, like a muscle that had been asleep for years trying to wake up. One of the teenagers had dropped something in his haste to escape, a wallet that now lay on the ground a few feet away. William picked it up, seeing the kid's school ID inside, but decided this wasn't the time to deal with that. He put it in his coat pocket and turned his full attention back to the woman who was now breathing in short, labored gasps. "You're not fine," William said firmly but gently. "You're in pain. Let me help you." The young woman shook her head, attempting to take a step away from the lamppost, but her legs buckled. William reacted on instinct, extending his arms just in time to catch her. "Easy, easy," he murmured, surprised by the softness in his own voice. "I'm not going to leave you here." The young woman looked up at him, and in that instant, William saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope mixed with fear, absolute vulnerability, and a spark of gratitude so pure it took his breath away. "My name is Sarah," she whispered, weakly gripping his arm. I need to get to the hospital. The contractions won't stop." William felt a stabbing pain in his stomach, a distant echo of a pain he had tried to bury, but there was no time to think about that now. Without saying another word, he gently guided her toward his car, which was still stopped in the middle of the street with its hazard lights blinking. He opened the passenger door carefully and helped her sit down. Sarah settled in with difficulty, breathing in short gasps, one hand on her belly and the other gripping the seatbelt as if it were a lifeline. William circled the car quickly, got in, started the engine and accelerated while the city lights began to flicker in the falling night. Neither of them knew that this moment marked the beginning of something that would transform their lives forever. Destiny had just woven the first thread of a story that neither had asked for, but both desperately needed. William drove with almost reckless precision, weaving between cars, accelerating through every yellow light, while his knuckles turned white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. Beside him, Sarah breathed with difficulty, trying to control the waves of pain that shook her every few minutes. The car's interior smelled of expensive leather and that costly cologne William wore, a brutal contrast to the simplicity of Sarah's wrinkled coat and her worn boots. She looked out the window, watching the blurred lights of the city pass by, biting her lower lip to keep from screaming. William glanced at her sideways, worried, not knowing exactly what to say. He had spent so long avoiding these kinds of situations, fleeing from anything that reminded him of hospitals, babies, or the life he'd lost. And now here he was, racing at full speed with a pregnant stranger he knew nothing about. "How much longer?" Sarah asked in a strained voice. 10 minutes maximum," William replied, pressing even harder on the accelerator. "Hang on, please." Sarah nodded slightly, squeezing her eyes shut as another contraction ripped through her like lightning. William felt the helplessness course through him from head to toe. He wanted to help but didn't know how. Words stuck in his throat. Finally, he tried to distract her. "Is there someone I should call?" "The baby's father. Your family." Sarah slowly opened her eyes and William noticed how a shadow of sadness darkened them. She swallowed hard, adjusting herself in the seat with difficulty. "There's no one," she said in a low voice, almost inaudible. "Well, there's my sister, but she works the night shift at a diner in Dorchester. I don't want to scare her if this is just a false alarm." William frowned. "And the father?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh without humor. "The father," she repeated as if the words burned her mouth. "He left 6 months ago. As soon as I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. At first he made up excuses, said he needed time to think, to clear his head. Then he simply stopped answering the phone. His mother told me he moved to California, that he got a job there. I guess it was easier for him to run to another state than to face responsibility." William clenched his jaw, feeling a dull rage toward this man he didn't even know. What kind of coward abandons a pregnant woman? But he said nothing, just kept driving, processing what he'd just heard. Sarah continued, as if she needed to get it all out. "At first I cried a lot, I won't lie. I thought we were going to build something together, you know? But then I understood that if he didn't want to be here, it was better this way. My baby deserves to be surrounded by people who truly love him, not someone who sees him as a burden." The maturity in Sarah's words contrasted with her youth. William calculated she must be 23, maybe 24, but she spoke with a wisdom that only comes from pain that's been processed and accepted. He remained silent, feeling something strange churning in his chest. There was something about this woman, something about her quiet strength, her unshakable kindness even when life had dealt her hard blows. William didn't understand how someone could maintain that light after being abandoned, rejected, humiliated. He had lost his own light 4 years ago and never got it back. "And you?" Sarah asked suddenly, turning to look at him with genuine curiosity. "Do you have family?" William felt his throat tighten. The question caught him off guard, completely disarming him. He opened his mouth to respond with some polite lie, something vague and generic that would steer the conversation away from dangerous territory. But when his eyes met Sarah's, he saw in them such sincere warmth that the words escaped before he could stop them. "I had," he said simply, his voice hoarse. "I had family." Sarah didn't press, didn't ask more questions. She simply nodded with understanding, as if she knew there were stories that hurt too much to tell in a car in the middle of the night. Instead, she extended her trembling hand and placed it gently on William's arm. It was a small gesture, almost insignificant, but for him it was like a lightning bolt running through him. It had been so long since anyone had touched him with that kind of tenderness, with that pure and selfless empathy. For a moment, William felt something inside him, something he had kept frozen and buried, begin to thaw. He said nothing, just kept driving while the lights of Massachusetts General Hospital appeared on the horizon. Sarah withdrew her hand when another contraction shook her, this time stronger, more intense. William accelerated the final meters, screeching into the emergency zone. Doctors and nurses ran toward them when they saw the situation. As they helped Sarah out of the car and placed her in a wheelchair, William stood there beside his vehicle, watching her disappear through the automatic doors, not knowing why his feet refused to move away from there. William stood in front of the hospital's automatic doors for almost 6 full minutes, his expensive leather shoes shining under the fluorescent lights at the emergency entrance. He knew he should leave. He had no obligation to this woman, no tie that bound him to stay. He had fulfilled his duty as a good Samaritan by bringing her here, right? He could get back in his car, return to his empty penthouse in Back Bay, pour himself a whiskey, and forget this had happened. But his legs wouldn't move. Every time he tried to take a step toward his vehicle, something pulled him back, an invisible force he couldn't understand. Finally, with a sigh of resignation that sounded more like defeat than conscious decision, William walked toward the hospital's interior. The smell of disinfectant and medicine hit him immediately, bringing with it a tsunami of memories he had fought to keep buried for 4 years. A middle-aged nurse with hair pulled back in a tight bun and an expression of permanent exhaustion stopped him at reception. "Are you family of the patient?" she asked mechanically without looking up from her computer. William hesitated. "I brought her in, she's alone." The nurse finally looked at him, evaluating him with those eyes that had seen too many sad stories. Something in her expression softened slightly. "She's under observation. The contractions were false, thank God. It was probably the stress and the scare that triggered them. The doctor wants to keep her a few hours to make sure everything's okay with the baby. You can wait for her in the waiting room if you'd like." William nodded, feeling a strange relief wash over him. He headed to the waiting room, a depressingly lit space with worn orange plastic chairs and an old television hanging in the corner, broadcasting the late-night news without volume. Nearly 4 hours passed. William checked his phone countless times, answered some urgent work emails, but his mind was elsewhere. Finally, he saw Sarah walking slowly out of the consultation area, accompanied by a young female doctor giving her instructions. Sarah looked exhausted but relieved, her hand resting protectively on her belly. When her eyes met William's, she froze, clearly surprised to see him there. "You're still here?" she asked, approaching with slow steps. William stood up, suddenly feeling uncomfortable, like a teenager who doesn't know what to do with his hands. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "What did the doctor say?" Sarah smiled, and it was a genuine smile, the kind that lights up an entire face. "False alarm. The baby's perfectly fine. It was just the stress of the day. They sent me home with strict orders to rest and not get upset anymore." "How are you planning to get home?" William asked before he could stop himself. Sarah shrugged with a naturalness that was heartbreaking. "I'll take the subway. It's not that far from here. Just about 50 minutes. William looked at her as if she just said the most absurd thing in the world. "You just had a terrible scare. You're 7 months pregnant. It's almost midnight. And you plan to get on the subway?" "Absolutely not. I'll drive you." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but William had already started walking toward the exit, ending the discussion. She followed him, shaking her head but unable to contain a small smile. During the journey, Sarah gave him directions to get to Mattapan, a humble neighborhood where the streets were narrower and the houses smaller. The contrast with William's world was abysmal. When they finally stopped in front of a modest 2-story house with peeling pale yellow paint, Sarah turned to look at him with shining eyes. "Thank you, William. Really, I don't know how to repay you for everything you did today." William was going to say something polite, something simple like, "It was nothing," or "Take care of yourself." But instead he heard himself say, "Can I come by tomorrow to see how you're doing?" The words came out on their own, surprising him as much as Sarah. She looked at him with a mixture of confusion and tenderness, tilting her head slightly. "Why would you do that? You don't know anything about me." William didn't have a logical answer. He couldn't explain this magnetic attraction to this story, to this woman who was facing something so big alone. He simply shrugged. "Maybe because I'd like to know you." Sarah remained silent for several seconds, studying him with those green eyes that seemed to see too much. Finally, she nodded. "All right, come tomorrow. My sister makes the best apple pie in the city. I'll invite you to breakfast." William felt something warm expand in his chest, something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten it. Sarah carefully got out of the car, waved goodbye, and disappeared inside her house. William stayed there a few more minutes, the engine running, looking at that closed door. He didn't understand what he was doing, but for the first time in 4 years, he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason to get up tomorrow. William arrived the next day with a basket of fresh fruit and natural juice he'd bought at a market on the way. He felt ridiculous carrying gifts, but he couldn't arrive empty-handed. When Sarah opened the door, dressed in a cream-colored blouse and comfortable grey sweatpants, her face lit up with such genuine joy that William's ridiculousness seemed completely worth it. "You really came. Come in, come in. My sister's already excited to meet you." The house inside was small but impeccably clean, decorated with family photographs on the walls and that kind of warmth that money can't buy. It smelled like freshly baked apples and coffee. Sarah's sister, a petite woman in her early 30s, with her hair in a braid and eyes identical to Sarah's, came out of the kitchen drying her hands on a floral apron. "Oh, but what a handsome young man," she exclaimed, making both William and Sarah blush. "Sarah told me everything you did yesterday. God bless you, son." During breakfast, William also met Sarah's younger brother, a 19-year-old kid named Tommy who studied community college in the evenings and worked as a delivery driver in the mornings to help with expenses. He met Aunt Margaret, who lived on the second floor, and came down every so often to chat amiably about the neighbors. They were working people, the kind of families that hold together despite difficulties, that celebrate small victories and face storms together. William felt strangely comfortable among them, even though his world was so different. They didn't talk about money, didn't ask what he did for a living, didn't treat him differently because of his expensive clothes or watch. They simply welcomed him with open arms, grateful that he had taken care of their Sarah. The days turned into weeks. William began appearing regularly, always with some excuse. He'd bring something that had been left over, he was passing through the area by chance, or he simply admitted he wanted to see how Sarah was doing. It was during one of the prenatal consultations 4 weeks after that first encounter when everything changed. William had insisted on accompanying Sarah and paying for the consultation with a private obstetrician, someone who would guarantee the best care for her and the baby. They were in the waiting room of the office, a modern and well-lit place in Beacon Hill, when Sarah turned to look at him with a serious expression. "William, I have to ask you something. Tell me, why do you do all this?" Her voice was soft but direct. "Don't misunderstand me. I'm grateful beyond words, but I don't understand. You appeared in my life out of nowhere. You've helped me with everything. You spend your time with me, with my family. Why?" William felt the air escape from his lungs. He had known this moment would eventually come. Sarah was too intelligent not to question him. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally leaned back in his chair, looking at the ceiling as if he could find the right words there. "I had a wife," he began in a barely audible voice. "Her name was Catherine. We met in college, got married young. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. 4 years ago, she got pregnant. We were excited, scared, but excited. We bought the crib, painted the room yellow because we wanted it to be a surprise. We chose names." Sarah remained silent, sensing that William needed to get this out without interruptions. He continued, and now his voice trembled slightly. "The pregnancy was complicated from the start. Catherine had high blood pressure. The doctors warned us, but everyone said that with care she'd be fine. But the day of delivery, something went terribly wrong. There were complications, excessive bleeding, the baby was in fetal distress. They tried to save them both. They did an emergency C-section, brought in specialists, but..." William stopped, swallowing hard. The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. "They couldn't save either of them. I lost Catherine and our son on the same day, in the same hour." Sarah let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with both hands. Tears began rolling down her cheeks uncontrollably. William continued, now that he'd opened that box, he couldn't stop the torrent. "Since that day, something inside me died too. I stopped believing in everything. In God, in justice, in the idea that good things happen to good people. I became an empty shell that just existed. I worked like an automaton, made money because it was the only thing I knew how to do, but I didn't feel anything. Nothing mattered. I avoided hospitals, avoided pregnant women, avoided children, avoided anything that reminded me of what I'd lost." And then he looked up at Sarah. Then I saw you on that street, abandoned, suffering, and something inside me broke, or maybe it fixed itself. I don't know. I just know I couldn't leave you alone. I couldn't walk away." Sarah extended her hand and took William's, squeezing it with surprising strength for someone in her condition. She said nothing because there were no words big enough for that pain. She simply was there, present, holding his hand while William let out 4 years of contained tears. In that instant, in that anonymous waiting room, two broken souls began to understand that maybe God hadn't abandoned them after all. Maybe he was just preparing them to find each other. After that confession in the waiting room, something fundamental changed between William and Sarah. They were no longer just two people that destiny had accidentally brought together. Now they were two survivors who recognized each other in the scars they carried. In the following days, William became even more present in Sarah's life. He accompanied her to all her medical appointments, made sure she took her vitamins, even began learning about stages of pregnancy, reading articles on the internet at midnight when insomnia wouldn't let him sleep. Sarah, for her part, seemed genuinely happy with his company. She told him stories of her childhood, of her dreams of studying social work someday, of how she imagined raising her child with love and solid values, even if she was alone. William listened to every word with an attention he hadn't paid to anything in years. One afternoon, they were sitting in the small backyard of Sarah's house under the shade of a maple tree with bright red leaves climbing up the concrete wall. The October sun fell softly over Boston, painting everything in golden tones. Sarah drank lemonade while William sipped coffee that Sarah's sister had insisted on making for him. The baby moved visibly inside Sarah's belly, and she laughed seeing how a small protrusion appeared and disappeared under her blouse. "I think he's going to be a soccer player," she joked, caressing the place where the baby kicked. "He won't stop moving." William watched, fascinated, with a mixture of wonder and melancholy in his dark brown eyes. "May I?" He extended his hand timidly. Sarah nodded with a warm smile, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. William felt the little kick against his palm and something broke inside him. But this time it wasn't pain. It was something else, something like hope. Sarah observed him tenderly, noticing how William's eyes moistened. After a moment, she spoke with a soft but firm voice. "William, I need to tell you something important." He looked up, meeting those green eyes that seemed to shine with an inner light. "I know you've suffered a lot. I know you lost everything you loved, and that the world seemed like a dark and meaningless place after that. But I want you to know something. God didn't abandon you. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to tell you because it's what my heart feels." William tensed slightly but didn't remove his hand from Sarah's belly. She continued, "Sometimes God allows us to go through dark valleys, not because he's forgotten us, but because he's preparing something new for us, something we needed to break first in order to receive. I can't understand your pain. I don't pretend to, but I can see that there's something beautiful starting to grow in you again." William shook his head with a sad smile. "I don't know if I can believe in that, Sarah. I stopped believing a long time ago." "I'm not asking you to believe everything all at once," she responded with infinite patience. "I'm just asking you not to completely close that door. Maybe God is writing a new story for you, for us. Maybe we found each other because we both needed to heal. You from your past and me from my fear of the future." William remained silent for a long while, processing her words. There was something about Sarah's unshakable faith that moved him deeply. She had been abandoned, humiliated, left alone to face motherhood, and yet she maintained that capacity to see light where others would only see darkness. It was a different kind of strength from anything William had ever known. It wasn't the strength of someone who had never been hurt, but of someone who had been shattered and had chosen to rebuild themselves with the broken pieces. That afternoon, as shadows lengthened over the backyard and the maple leaves swayed in the breeze, William felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years, a small spark of hope planting itself in his heart like a fragile but persistent seed. If you're connecting with this story, I'd love for you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel and share your own experiences in the comments. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that hope can find us when we least expect it. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a month. William was now completely integrated into Sarah's life and her family. He helped with grocery shopping from the supermarket, accompanied Sarah's sister when she needed to go to the market to sell the pies she made to earn extra money. Even paid Tommy's enrollment for a computer course the kid had wanted to take so badly. He didn't do it with an air of superiority or expecting anything in return. He simply did it because he wanted to, because for the first time in years he felt his money served a purpose beyond accumulating in a bank account. The family had welcomed him as if he were one of them, without questions, without judgments. And William, that man who had lived locked in his crystal tower of self-imposed solitude, discovered that true wealth wasn't in his bank account, but in those afternoons of shared laughter around a humble table. One night, as he returned to his penthouse after having dinner with them, William stopped at a red light and looked at himself in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 4 years, he recognized the person looking back at him. And that person no longer had completely dead eyes. The call came at 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday in December. William woke up startled, fumbling on his nightstand until he found his vibrating phone. It was Tommy, his voice broken with nerves. "William, it's Sarah. Her water broke. My sister is trying to get a taxi, but at this hour..." William didn't let him finish. "I'm on my way. 12 minutes. He didn't hang up, simply dropped the phone on the bed while he was already putting on the pants he'd left on a chair. He splashed water on his face, put on a t-shirt, grabbed his car keys and ran out of his penthouse without even putting his shoes on properly. The journey from Back Bay to Matapan had never seemed so long. The streets were empty at that hour, lit only by the yellowish street lights that created pools of clarity in the darkness. William drove like a man possessed, mentally praying, though he wasn't sure to whom he was praying, or if his prayers would be heard after 4 years of silence toward God. When he arrived, he found Sarah in the living room, breathing with difficulty, supported by her sister, who murmured soothing words while stroking her hair. Sarah wore a loose olive green dress and sandals, her hospital bag already prepared next to the door. When she saw William, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "You came," she whispered between contractions. "I'll always come," William replied. And in that moment, they both knew he wasn't just talking about that night. William helped her stand carefully, holding her firmly as they walked toward the car. Sarah's sister followed them, also getting into the vehicle. During the drive to the hospital, Sarah squeezed William's hand with a strength he didn't know she possessed. The contractions came closer and closer together, more intense. William drove fast but carefully, talking to Sarah constantly, keeping her focused on his voice. "Breathe like this with me. Everything's going to be okay. You're going to meet your baby very soon." Sarah nodded, biting her lip until it almost bled. They arrived at the hospital in record time. The emergency team was already waiting because William had called from the car to let them know they were coming. They put Sarah in a wheelchair and quickly took her to the delivery room. William was going to stay in the waiting room, but Sarah clung to his hand. "Don't leave me," she begged with a broken voice. "Please stay with me." William looked at the doctors, who nodded, giving him permission. They handed him sterile clothing, and minutes later he was beside Sarah in the delivery room, holding her hand while she pushed with every fiber of her being. The hours dragged on in an eternity of pain, sweat, tears, and superhuman effort. William had never witnessed anything so intense, so primitive, so miraculous. Every time Sarah screamed, he squeezed her hand and whispered words of encouragement. Every time she said she couldn't do it anymore, he reminded her how strong she was. And at some point during that endless early morning, William understood something fundamental. He was living the moment that had been stolen from him 4 years ago, but in a completely different way. Finally, after almost 7 hours of labor, a sharp cry filled the room. The doctor lifted a small baby covered in fluids, crying forcefully, moving his tiny arms. "It's a beautiful, healthy boy," he announced with a smile. Sarah sobbed with happiness, extending her arms to receive her son. The nurses quickly cleaned him, wrapped him in a soft white blanket, and placed him on Sarah's chest. She looked at him with a love so pure and absolute it seemed to fill the entire room. "Daniel," she whispered against the baby's little head. "My little Daniel." William watched the scene from his place beside the bed, and it was as if a dam that had held back 4 years of repressed emotions finally broke. Tears began rolling down his face uncontrollably. Tears of pain mixed with joy, of loss mixed with hope, of death mixed with new life. Sarah looked up at him, saw his face bathed in tears, and extended a hand toward him. William took it, trembling. "Do you want to hold him?" Sarah asked with a soft voice. William shook his head at first, terrified, feeling unworthy, but Sarah insisted with a smile. "Please, I want you to be the first person to hold him after me." With trembling hands, William received the small warm bundle wrapped in the blanket. Daniel was tiny, perfect, with his wrinkled little face and his eyes closed. He weighed almost nothing, but at the same time he weighed the entire world. William brought him close to his chest, feeling the baby's warmth against his heart, hearing his soft rhythmic breathing. And in that instant, in that hospital room lit by cold fluorescent lights, something inside William healed. Not completely. The scars were still there and probably always would be, but for the first time in 4 years he felt that maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten him after all. Maybe Sarah was right and this was the beginning of a new story, a second chance he never thought he deserved, but was receiving anyway. He looked at Sarah, who watched him with tears in her eyes and a radiant smile, and then looked at the baby in his arms. In that moment, William knew with absolute certainty that he would never, ever be alone again. The first days after Daniel's birth were a whirlwind of emotions, sleepless nights, and constant discoveries. Sarah recovered slowly at home, surrounded by her family's love and William's constant presence, who had completely reorganized his life to be available whenever she needed him. He cancelled important meetings without thinking twice, delegated projects he once considered urgent, and spent long hours in that humble house in Matapan, learning to change diapers, warm bottles with expressed breast milk, and rock a baby who cried at 3 a.m. Sarah's family watched him with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. They had never known anyone like him. Someone who, having so much money, chose to sit on the floor to play with a newborn baby instead of being in luxurious offices. One afternoon, while Sarah nursed Daniel in the rocking chair that William had bought and had installed in her room, Sarah's sister whispered in her ear with tears in her eyes, "That man loves you, my daughter, and he loves your baby as if he were his own." Sarah had been thinking exactly the same thing for days, but hearing it out loud from her sister made the thought become real, tangible, impossible to ignore. She watched William through the half-open door. He was in the backyard washing Daniel's little clothes by hand because the washing machine had broken that morning, whistling softly a song she didn't recognize. He wore a simple grey t-shirt and jeans, so different from the impeccable suits she'd met him in. His hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, now gently rubbed tiny little shirts against a concrete wash basin. Something stirred inside Sarah's chest, something deep and terrifying and wonderful at the same time. When had it happened exactly? At what moment had this generous stranger become someone indispensable? At what moment had she stopped wondering why he was there and begun to be unable to imagine life without him? She finished nursing Daniel, gently laid him in his new crib, and went out to the backyard with her heart beating so hard she thought William might be able to hear it. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. William immediately looked up, leaving the clothes in the wash basin and drying his hands on a rag. The expression on his face went from relaxed to worried in a second. "Did something happen? Are you okay? Is Daniel okay?" Sarah couldn't help but smile at his immediate concern. "We're fine. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." William nodded, approaching her cautiously, as if afraid she might break. They sat together on the step leading to the backyard, the afternoon sun warming their backs. Sarah took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "What are we doing, William? What is this that's happening between us?" William remained silent for a long while, looking at his own hands as if he could find the answers there. Finally, he looked up and looked directly into her eyes with an intensity that took Sarah's breath away. "I'm in love with you," he said simply, without embellishment, without preamble. "And I love Daniel as if he were my own son." The words fell between them like stones in a calm lake, creating ripples that expanded in all directions. Sarah felt the world stop, felt time freeze in that perfect and terrifying instant. "I know it's crazy," William continued, his voice increasingly passionate. "I know we met barely 3 months ago. I know you just had a baby. I know I have a complicated past and I should probably give you more time, but I can't keep pretending this is just friendship or charity or whatever we've been calling it. I love you, Sarah. I love your kindness, your faith, your strength. I love how you see the world, how you forgive, how you find light in darkness. And when I hold Daniel, I feel like I'm holding my own soul in my arms. I feel like God gave me a second chance and I don't want to waste it." Sarah had tears rolling freely down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. William took her hands in his, trembling. "I know Daniel has a biological father who abandoned him, but I want to be his real father. I want to wake up at 3 a.m. when he cries. I want to teach him to ride a bike. I want to be at his graduation. I want everything, and I want to build a family with you if you'll let me." Sarah couldn't speak. The words stuck in her throat mixed with sobs of pure happiness. Finally, she managed to nod, smiling through the tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "It scares me how fast it happened. It scares me to think you might regret it. Everything about this scares me, but I love you. And I know Daniel loves you too. When he cries and you hold him, he calms down as if he recognizes that you're home." William hugged her, pulling her against his chest, and they both remained like that for a long while, crying and laughing at the same time, feeling how something beautiful and new was being born between them. It was different from any love either had experienced before. It wasn't the impetuous love of youth. It was something deeper, forged in shared pain, in mutual vulnerability, in the conscious decision to choose each other despite everything. From the kitchen window, Sarah's sister watched them with a smile and her own tears, whispering a prayer of thanks. Tommy passed through the backyard, saw the scene, smiled knowingly, and quietly retreated. And in his crib, little Daniel slept peacefully, unaware of the fact that he had just gained a father who would love him with every fiber of his being. The wedding was celebrated 4 months later, in March, in a simple but love-filled ceremony at a small neighborhood church. There was no designer dress or luxurious hall, but there was something about the simplicity of that day that made it perfect. Sarah wore a simple white dress that reached her knees with delicate lace sleeves and a band of fresh flowers in her hair that Tommy had helped choose. William wore a light beige suit without a tie, with a white rose in his lapel. Daniel, barely 4 months old, slept peacefully in his grandmother's arms during the ceremony, wrapped in a little white suit that made him look like a little angel. The guests were few but significant. Sarah's family, some neighbors who had watched the girl grow up and loved her like their own, and 2 of William's business partners who had become true friends upon seeing the transformation Sarah had caused in him. When the priest asked them to exchange vows, William spoke with a firm but emotional voice, looking Sarah directly in the eyes. "Sarah, when I met you, I thought my life was already over. I thought I was just passing time until I could reunite with the people I'd lost. But you taught me that God writes stories in unexpected places, that love can be born from pain, and that it's never too late to start over. I promise to love you in health and in sickness, in wealth and in poverty. I promise to be the father Daniel deserves. I promise to build with you a home full of faith, laughter and love. I promise to honor your kindness every day of my life." Sarah wiped away tears with her free hand, the other clutching William's. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was soft but full of conviction. "William, you appeared at the darkest moment of my life and showed me that God never abandons us. He just waits for the perfect moment to show us his plan. You gave me dignity when others took it away. You gave me hope when I was scared, and you gave my son a father before he was born. I promise to love you with all that I am. I promise to always remind you who you are when you forget. I promise to build with you a family that honors God. I love you today. I will love you tomorrow. I will love you always." There wasn't a dry eye in that little church. Even the priest, an older man who had seen hundreds of weddings, had to discreetly wipe away tears. When they declared them husband and wife, William kissed Sarah with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and shared futures. Outside the church, they threw rice and rose petals as the couple emerged, smiling, with Daniel now awake in William's arms, looking at everything with his big, curious eyes. The reception was in the house's backyard, decorated with Christmas lights they'd borrowed and wildflowers that Aunt Margaret had cut from a friend's garden. There were tacos, lemonade, and a modest but delicious cake that Sarah's sister had made with her own hands. There was no expensive DJ music, just an old jukebox someone had brought playing romantic songs in English that made couples embrace on the improvised dance floor. William danced with Sarah under the stars, with Daniel asleep against his chest in a carrier that Sarah's sister's friends had given them as a wedding present. "Are you happy?" William asked, swaying gently to the rhythm of the music. Sarah looked at him with shining eyes. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be." William smiled, kissing her forehead with infinite tenderness. In the following weeks, they began their life together officially. William sold his huge empty penthouse in Back Bay and bought a cozy house in a quiet area of Cambridge with 3 bedrooms, a small garden where Daniel could play when he grew up, and enough space for Sarah's family when they wanted to visit. He insisted that Sarah's sister leave her exhausting job at the diner, offering her a dignified pension so she could finally rest after years of sacrifice. He paid for Tommy to attend a technical computer school the kid had dreamed of but could never afford, and got him a part-time job at one of his companies so he could gain experience. But he did it all without airs of superiority, without making them feel like charity, but like family taking care of family. Sarah's sister cried with gratitude, kissing William's hands and calling him my son from then on. Sarah enrolled in evening social work classes, a dream she had postponed for years. William took care of Daniel those nights, giving him his bottle, changing him, singing him lullabies he made up on the spot that didn't make much sense, but that the baby seemed to love. He learned to be a father in real time, making mistakes, laughing at them, improving each day. Daniel grew up surrounded by abundant love, not knowing that the man who held him with such devotion didn't share his blood, because true love doesn't need DNA to be real. The months turned into a year, and that first year was one of deep healing for both. William began to talk about Catherine without the pain splitting him in two, remembering her fondly but without letting the past poison his present. Sarah blossomed in ways she never imagined possible, her confidence growing, her dreams expanding, her life rebuilt with dignity and purpose. They celebrated Daniel's first birthday with a party full of colorful balloons, chocolate cake, and endless laughter. The boy, wobbling in his first uncertain steps, walked directly toward William with his arms extended, calling him Daddy for the first time. William lifted him in the air, laughing and crying at the same time, knowing that this was the moment that made it worth having survived all those dark years. 3 years passed like a sigh full of precious moments. Daniel was no longer that tiny baby who slept curled up against William's chest. Now he was a boy almost 4 years old, full of energy, curiosity, and an infectious laugh that filled every corner of the house. He had his mother's green eyes and a mischievous smile that melted hearts. He called William Daddy without any doubt, without any question, because for him there was no other truth. William was the one who took him to preschool every morning, who played soccer with him in the garden on Sundays, who read him stories before bed with funny voices that made Daniel laugh until his belly hurt. Sarah had finished her social work studies and now worked at a community center helping low-income families, fulfilling that dream that once seemed impossible. Her life had been completely transformed, but she hadn't lost that kind essence that defined her. If anything, now she had more tools to help others going through situations similar to what she had lived. The house in Cambridge had become a true home, full of laughter, photos on the walls, toys scattered on the floor, and that kind of beautiful chaos that only a happy family can create. One September morning, Sarah woke up feeling strange. A dizziness had shaken her as soon as she opened her eyes, and a familiar nausea churned her stomach. She stayed still in bed, processing the signals her body was sending while William continued sleeping beside her with an arm over her in that protective gesture he had never abandoned, not even in dreams. Sarah's heart began to race. She knew these signals. She had felt them before, almost 4 years ago. Carefully not to wake William, she got up from the bed, walked to the bathroom, and searched in the cabinet for a pregnancy test she had bought weeks earlier when her suspicions began, but that she hadn't dared to use. Her hands trembled as she opened the box. 4 minutes later, she was looking at the 2 pink lines confirming what her heart already knew. She was pregnant again. Sarah sat on the edge of the bathtub with the test in her hands, feeling a mixture of emotions so intense she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Joy, fear, hope, gratitude, all mixed in a whirlwind that made her feel dizzy in a completely different way. This time was different. This time she wasn't alone. This time she had William. She came out of the bathroom determined to tell him immediately. But when she reached the bedroom, William was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing his eyes. Daniel had run into the room, jumping on the bed in his dinosaur pajamas, shouting something about wanting pancakes for breakfast. William caught him in the air, spinning him around while the boy squealed with happiness. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching that everyday scene that never ceased to amaze her, with the pregnancy test hidden behind her back. William saw her and immediately knew something was up. He knew her too well. "Daniel, son, why don't you go watch cartoons for a bit while Mommy and I talk?" he said with a soft voice. The boy nodded enthusiastically and ran off toward the living room. William stood up, approaching Sarah with concern in his eyes. "What's wrong, love? Are you okay?" Sarah couldn't contain the tears anymore. She pulled out the pregnancy test from behind her back and showed it to him, watching as William's expression went from confusion to comprehension to absolute amazement in a matter of seconds. We're going to... William couldn't finish the sentences. Words stuck in his throat. Sarah nodded, smiling through the tears. "We're going to have a baby." William hugged her so tightly he almost lifted her off the ground, and he began to laugh and cry at the same time, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, needing to hear it. "Happy? Sarah, I don't have words. It's like God is giving me everything I thought I'd never have. The following months were of preparation and anticipation. Daniel was excited about the idea of being a big brother, though he didn't completely understand what that meant. He talked to Sarah's growing belly, sang him made-up songs, told him about his preschool adventures. William lived in a constant state of hyper-vigilant protection, making sure Sarah rested, ate well, didn't overexert herself. He accompanied every medical appointment with his heart in his throat, but this time there was no paralyzing fear, only cautious hope. The ultrasounds showed a healthy, strong baby. At the one where they revealed the sex, the doctor smiled and said, "It's a girl." William squeezed Sarah's hand, feeling tears roll down his cheeks. A girl. They were going to have a girl. They decided to name her Grace, a name that meant divine favor, because that was exactly what this girl represented. Light after darkness, hope after despair, life after loss. The last months of pregnancy passed between preparations for the baby's room, buying tiny pink and yellow clothes, and Daniel practicing how to be a responsible big brother by carrying his stuffed animals with extreme care. The family was complete now, with Sarah's sister visiting them constantly, knitting blankets for her new granddaughter, and Tommy, now a 22-year-old young man studying engineering thanks to William's support, being the proud uncle who promised to teach Grace to use computers from a young age. One May afternoon, when the cherry blossoms painted the streets pink and the air smelled of spring and new possibilities, Sarah felt the first contractions. This time there was no panic, no teenagers attacking her, no solitude. William took her to the hospital calmly. Daniel stayed with his grandmother, who promised to bring him to meet his little sister the next day. And everything flowed with a smoothness that seemed orchestrated by divine hands. The delivery was faster than Daniel's, as if Grace was in a hurry to arrive in the world. And when that perfect baby, with abundant dark hair and little eyes that promised to be as expressive as her family's, was born crying forcefully, William knew that his life was finally completely filled with everything he once thought he had lost forever. Grace was barely 4 days old when William held her for the first time in the tranquility of their home, sitting in the rocking chair in the baby's room, which they had decorated with so much love. The evening light came softly through the window, painting everything in golden tones. Sarah slept in the master bedroom, exhausted but radiant, recovering from childbirth. Daniel played quietly in his room, trying to be the careful big brother he had promised to be. William gently rocked Grace, observing her perfect little face, her lips forming a small O while she slept, her tiny hands closed in fists. She was so small, so fragile, so perfect, it was hard for him to breathe just looking at her. He brought his face close to hers, inhaling that unique newborn baby smell, feeling her warmth against his chest. And in that moment of absolute stillness, William did something he hadn't done genuinely in more than 7 years. He prayed. Not with elaborate or structured words, but with his heart completely open. "Thank you," he whispered against Grace's soft hair. "Thank you for not forgetting me. Thank you for Sarah, for Daniel, for Grace. Thank you for showing me that pain wasn't the end of my story, just the darkest chapter before dawn." Sarah appeared in the room's doorway, leaning on the frame. Watching that scene she would never tire of witnessing. William, with his daughter in his arms, whispering promises of eternal love to her. He looked up, saw her standing there, and smiled at her with that smile he reserved only for her, the one that said everything without needing words. "Come," he said softly, extending an arm toward her. Sarah approached slowly, still sore from childbirth, and curled up against William in the rocking chair that miraculously held all three of them. They stayed like that for a long while, in silence, simply existing together. Finally, Sarah spoke with a soft voice. "Do you remember that night almost 4 years ago when those teenagers attacked me on the street?" William nodded, absent-mindedly stroking Grace's hair. "Every detail, every second. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if you hadn't been there," Sarah continued. "If you had decided not to get involved, to go your own way, to ignore what was happening." William kissed her forehead, hugging her tighter. "But I was there. And it wasn't coincidence, Sarah. You were right from the beginning. God was writing something new for both of us. I was just too stubborn to see it." Daniel came running into the room, breaking the intimate moment with the subtlety of a 3-year-old hurricane. "Can I hold my little sister, please?" "Please." William and Sarah laughed, and with extreme care, William helped Daniel sit on the small sofa in the room and placed Grace in his arms, holding her firmly to make sure she was safe. Daniel looked at his sister with absolute adoration, gently touching her nose with a finger. "Hi, Grace. I'm your big brother and I'm going to take care of you always. I promise you." William felt his heart expand so much in his chest he thought it might explode. This was his family. Not the one he was born with, not the one he had tragically lost, but the one God had built from the broken pieces of two shattered lives. They were a family formed in unconventional circumstances, united by something stronger than blood: choice, love, faith, and second chances. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Grace grew healthy and strong, a happy baby who smiled constantly and who had everyone in the family wrapped around her tiny finger. Daniel turned out to be the most dedicated big brother in the world, always watching out for his little sister, running to tell mommy or daddy every time Grace made the slightest sound. The house filled with a boisterous joy, the kind that comes with small children, toys everywhere, constant laughter, and that beautiful chaos that is evidence of a life lived fully. William completely transformed the way he worked, prioritizing time with his family above everything else, delegating more responsibilities, rejecting projects that would require too much time away from home. He had learned in the most painful way possible that professional success means nothing if there are no people to share it with. Sarah continued working as a social worker, but on shifts that allowed her to be present for her children. She had become a reference point at her community center, known for her infinite empathy and for uniquely understanding the pain of women who arrived alone, scared, abandoned. She told them her story when she felt it could help, showing them that difficult endings could transform into beautiful beginnings. On Sundays, the whole family gathered at the house to eat. Sarah's sister, now completely retired and enjoying every moment with her grandchildren, Tommy with his new girlfriend who was studying medicine, Aunt Margaret with her endless gossip that made everyone laugh, and any friend or neighbor who needed a place to feel loved. The table was always full, noisy, chaotic, and perfect. One afternoon, while William pushed Daniel on the swing in the garden and Sarah nursed Grace sitting on a bench under the apple tree they had planted together, he stopped for a moment and simply observed. He observed his son laughing with total abandon, asking him to push him higher. He observed his wife singing softly to their daughter, gently rocking her. He observed his house, his garden, his life. And he felt something he hadn't felt in years: absolute peace, deep gratitude, renewed purpose. He realized that the pain he had experienced, as devastating and destructive as it was, had prepared him to appreciate this moment in a way he perhaps never could have if he hadn't gone through that dark valley. He didn't celebrate his tragedy. He never would. But he could recognize that those scars had made him capable of loving more deeply, of valuing more intensely, of living more consciously. That night, after putting the children to bed, William and Sarah sat on their bedroom balcony, watching the stars shining over Boston. William took Sarah's hand, intertwining their fingers. "I love you," he said simply. "Thank you for giving me back my life." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other. That's what true love does." And they remained like that in silence, grateful, complete, knowing that their lives finally had the purpose, love, and family they had both desperately needed. I want to invite you to be part of this journey with us. Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments how this story touched your heart, or tell us about a time when hope found you in an unexpected place. Your story matters, and this community is here to remind you that you're never alone in your struggles or your victories. Remember always, your wounds can become the doors through which your greatest blessing enters. Sometimes when everything seems lost, God is simply rewriting your ending. May the Lord bless your life with renewed hope, transform your pain into purpose, and show you that even in the darkest moments, He has never let go of your hand. Amen.